organized by James Ellsmore and his team at Island Innovation. So kicking off, I'm right on time. We have Dr. Jim Randall, who is our UNESCO Chair in Island Studies and Sustainability here in Prince Edward Island. Take it away, Jim.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks for that introduction. And it's good to see everybody, at least virtually out there. As Lori sort of alluded to, I've worn a number of hats over the years, but including being in Lori's position as the coordinator of the master's program at UPI and affiliated with the Institute of Island Studies. At the moment, I'm on sabbatical, which is a wonderful benefit for academic faculty members. But I'm still holding the position of UNESCO Chair in Island Studies and Sustainability. And so I come to you with that position. And that chair is an international chair. The purpose of the chair is to facilitate networks of people that are interested in islands and issues related to sustainability. So one of the projects that we had, one of many projects that UNESCO Chair had, is a project that I'm just going to bring up a set of slides here. And I'm glad that Lori sort of organized this session. I don't see the slides here. Just hold on a second. I'm going to put it up here again. Oh, it's at the end of the slides. There it is. That's why you don't see it. So, so this is project. I'll tell you a little bit about this project. Yeah, it's a three-year project funded by the Canadian Social Science and Humanities Research Council, one of the three main research councils, academic research councils in Canada. And it takes as its premise, as Lori suggested, the fact that islands, as we all know, are not the same. But they're also not unique. They have some things in common. A lot of attention has been paid to small island states or small island developing states. In other words, the politically independent states. Over the years, up until recently, there's been less attention that's been paid to what has been referred to by my colleague and friend, Godfrey Baldacchino, as subnational island jurisdictions, or SNIDJs. And this is a little bit surprising. It's maybe that they're less transparent because they're part of a larger nation state. But when you think of the hundreds, if not thousands, of these subnational island jurisdictions, they can be very significant on a global level in a variety of different ways. So for example, some of them are quite large in terms of population. So think of Hainan, the province of Hainan, China, that has over 9 million people in it. Think of some of the offshore financial centers like the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands, and even some of the Channel Islands off of Great Britain. And they can be quite important economically for the global financial system. Ecologically, I think we're all aware of the high level of biodiversity and the biodiversity hotspots on islands, but think of the Galapagos as a subnational island jurisdiction as part of Ecuador. Strategically, I think we're all realize now, if you look at the South China Sea and East China Sea, and places like the Chagos Archipelago and Diego Garcia, how important some of these sort of semi-autonomous kinds of islands can be. And when you start looking at some of these quasi-independent or semi-autonomous islands, you realize that they're not all the same. And it's tempting sometimes to think of them as only two groups. And in fact, the project implies that there are two groups. But there's an array of differences across these different groups. Some of them are former colonies. So Martinique as a French colony, or the Azores as a Portuguese former colony. Some of them are part of federated states. So my own island right now, Prince Edward Island, as a province of Canada, or Hawaii as a province of, as a state of the United States. The relations that they have sometimes are quite unique. So it's very difficult sometimes to pin down what the relationship is with a larger state or metropole. So there's differences between, of understanding between, for example, the relationship between Taiwan or Hong Kong, or even the Faroe Islands themselves. Some of them have very unusual sounding relationships. So think of the Cook Islands and its free association with New Zealand. Over the years, one of the features we've seen of these subnational island jurisdictions is that many of them have resisted the lure of independence, formal independence. And they've done that even though they have repeatedly had referenda that have allowed them the opportunity to become independent. And there's often a tension that exists, not always, but a tension that exists between cultural nationalism, or an attempt to try to define themselves as a people on an island, and potentially an economic and trade advantages of maintaining a semi-autonomous status. So that's sort of an outset, a little bit of a context, but let's look at the purpose of this project. And you see in italics at the top of this slide, the overall purpose is to better understand sustainable development practices and potential of small islands in all forms, but especially the role that sovereignty, and I could even expand that to say forms of governance and international relationships play in achieving a more sustainable future. And then there are three different sort of objectives beyond this purpose. One is to examine the similarities and differences between these two groups. And then to compare the relationships that these islands have with that larger, either the larger metropole in the case of subnational island jurisdictions, or the larger world, the world of islands as well. And finally, does the political status, the governance relationships on these islands, the small island state versus a SNIJ, do they influence the daily lives of islanders? So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, we're midway through a 3-year project here, and funding is from one of the Canadian governments. I'll say right at the outset here that this is a partnership development grant. So although it is a research grant, the explicit purpose of this is to build partnerships, to develop, to facilitate networks. And so if we can develop more networks with some people out there on this call, please contact myself and Lori and we will build you into this partnership. On this project, we have partners from 6 pairs of islands, and you can see on this slide down here, the 6 pairs of islands. And these pairs were selected partly because of population, the economy, a shared perhaps political history or colonial history. And so these are the 6 pairs of islands. And we're doing 2 stages of the research. The first was an online survey of island stakeholders, and the second would be a focus group of a subgroup of those stakeholders. So stage 1, and stage 1, as I'll show in a slide in just a moment, has almost been completed for all 12 of these islands. And it consisted of a structured survey, mostly closed-ended questions, and a stratified sample of participants was taken from 6 different groups of people. The first group would be from civil society, reps from NGOs, academics, or youth and students. And the second group are people from government representatives, business or entrepreneurs, or people from workers or trade unions. And you'll see down here 3 sort of categories of questions. We had a bunch of questions, but I've just given you the category. So the one set of questions related to the attitudes or the perceptions of the participants regarding the performance of the number of institutions of governance in those places. So for example, we might have questions on asking people to rate the performance as well as the degree of satisfaction with the institutions of governance like the police, the judiciary, the national, regional, or municipal governments if they happen to have them. A second set of questions asked people to rate the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals and what they believe are the success of their own governments in achieving the SDGs on their islands. But here we also asked people whether they'd incorporated the SDGs into their own lives. And we'd use surrogate indicators of SDGs to try to personalize it based upon the literature itself. And finally, we gave each pair of islands an opportunity to look at an issue that was specific to that pair of islands. So many of the islands have chosen sustainable tourism management. Some, as you'll hear from some of the speakers, looked at responses to financial crises. Stage 2, and only 2 islands have gone through the stage 2 because of the pandemic. And I'm getting my cue that I'm almost at the end here, so I'm gonna wrap up here. So you can see on the right-hand side some of the questions that we were asking in the focus groups. You can see the state of the survey completion. Most of those islands have already, and those are the numbers of people that have completed the surveys. Some of them are still open and a couple are still just about to start. So where do we go from here? You'll hear in just a moment from some of the others. What's the relevance of this? One, as I said, is this is a partnership development grant. So this is a way of developing stronger relationships between the groups of people, the co-investigators, and their own teams of researchers. And we've already seen this happen, and I hope that this summit will actually increase that number of people. The other one, as you'll hear from one of our speakers today, is to look at methods and comparative relevance, to see how people in different cultures actually perceive the research. There are policy outcomes, and how does sustainability really manifest itself in the everyday lives of people? And I'll end right there. Thank you, Laurie.
Great, thanks, Jim.
Stop share here.
Yeah, that's great, wonderful. Good overview. You can see the scope of work that we're